Alrighty, this is going to be episode 2 of AoV Shower Thoughts. This time we're going to be featuring the newest character that came out, Errol the Tainted. So the general overview for the video today is going to be me criticizing certain things that I find were lacking in Errol's character design, and I'm going to be commenting on some of the things that I think Arena of Valor and Tencent executed well with him. So the three main things that I'm going to be talking about is the splash art, his in-game character design, and some of the costuming and aesthetic choices they made for Errol. Okay, so let's talk about the splash art first. And the thing that I like about it is, number one, the focus and focal point of his demon arm that is on his right. I think this is a strong choice that they made within this piece of very well executed splash art. I think the demonic arm conveys to us Errol's character, which is he is half corrupted by a demon. I think the clear visual signal of the very bright reds and the saturated dark maroons here is a very good choice for Errol. And on his face, of course, he has the half corruption thing going on with one of his eyes glowing red, signifying the demon's eyes, and you can see the corruption on half his face. Another thing that I really like about the splash art is the really defined lines of the shadows and lights on his face and the dark circles under his eyes, because this gives him a very weary expression almost in a sense. And I like it because if you go and read Errol's lore, the basis of his character is, number one, the demon is corrupting him. Number two, he is constantly being chased by demon hunters for murders that he did not commit as Errol the human, but rather because the demon within Errol took over his mind and caused him to commit murders, which now the demon hunters are pursuing him for. And another point is he is also previously a member of the Demon Hunters, and this is going to come into play later, so just keep that in the back of your mind. So with all that out of the way about his splash art, all the good things about his splash art out of the way, I think this is a very well executed piece of art. I'm going to explain my biggest issues with Errol as a character. For what Errol is, he is extremely well executed. The idea of a half-demon, all the colors work well together, all the aesthetic choices for his demonic side works very well. I think that is well executed. However, in the realm of being well executed, and for the concept that they settled with, everything about Errol could have been pushed so much further. Nothing is wrong with him, yet everything is at the same time. What I mean by this is, Errol is a perfectly fine character design. However, he could have been so much better on the basis that they could have pushed the idea of Errol so much further. Because right now, what I see is a very generic execution of what Errol could have been. And a generic execution is never bad if it's well executed, but it's never going to be great. And I think Errol has fallen into this chasm of being not great, yet not terrible at the same time, which honestly is not a good place for a character design to be, because you have to have your character design to be memorable, and being just good enough isn't actually good enough. Being satisfactory isn't good enough. And I think Errol has fallen into this place where everything about him is fine, yet nothing is splendid. Because when I see him, I just think about Kaneki or Sasuke in Curse Mark 1 form, or I think about Kane and Rust from League of Legends. I don't see him as a standout character, rather a well-executed, generic character. With that out of the way, I'm going to show you guys his in-game model and the aesthetic that they chose to go with for Errol. So when you first look at Errol, you look at his in-game character model and you look at his splash art. I think most of us can agree he is attractive. He is a handsome character. He doesn't look bad. He looks very visually appealing. And that by itself is okay. However, the issue that I have with the execution of Errol as a character, and the bulk of my issues actually, is they never hit the mark of what Errol is supposed to be as a character. So what do I mean by this? If you go and read Errol's lore, his lore is essentially about how crappy this young man's life has been up to this point. everything about his life is screwed up. First thing that happened in his life is the first major thing that we get exposed to within his character lore is his brother gets killed in front of him. After that, he basically becomes very introverted and very shut off from everyone. And within combat, he stops worrying about his own safety and he becomes slowly crazed and consumed by the demon which is whispering words into his ears at night. Because of this, because of his crazed state, his mentor, Edmund, if you were wondering what his name was, decided to put him into solitary confinement with no windows and always chained up in the corner of a room. He put Errol into solitary confinement. And then after that, after Edmund dies and Errol is released, what happens is Errol's entire mind gets consumed by the demon again because the corruption became too much. And after that happens, the demon goes on a killing spree and kills a bunch of people. And then after that, Errol was constantly pursued by the demon hunters who were once his comrades, and he was eventually, he gets caught in a huge battle between the demon hunters which were pursuing him, and he was forced off a cliff, essentially. After all of this lore that I just explained to you, I think we can all agree one of the core concepts of Errol is that he is a broken and traumatized young man. His character fantasy and his character execution is supposed to be the idea of a boy who is traumatized, about a boy who is corrupted and is now chained to a destiny that he did not choose for himself, as the corruption chose it for him, as the demon who is slowly eating away at his sanity has forced him onto a path of darkness, a path that he did not choose for himself. And I think none of that trauma is reflected in Errol's character design. I don't see that trauma on him. In fact, he doesn't even have a single scar that I can see, and I think that is a huge issue, because they chose to make Errol aesthetically appeasing to look at without thinking about the consequences of what that ensued. Of course, I'm not going to sit here and then complain about that, because I think you can make a character aesthetically appeasing and still make the character's concept and the core concepts work. I think it's just that Tencent chose to override everything about trauma, override everything about his lore and about his character concept of being a damaged young man to make him a good-looking character, to make him visually appealing and to pander to their audience, which I think is a huge issue. Because when you look at the character concepts for what the character designer originally came up with, the concept art, I think, executes a much better vision of what Errol was supposed to do on two different levels. Number one, if you zoom in on the faces of these two character designs here, you can see minor abrasions and scarring on their face. You can see that here on this character, and you can see the minor abrasions on the face on this design. And I think that is a lot better executed under the basis that Errol literally fell off a freaking cliff, right? We want to at least embody some form of trauma onto his character design because he was thrown off a cliff. You want to show that. You want to show that this guy has been through a lot of trauma. You want to make him look weary. You want to make him look almost fatigued. And I think this version of Errol that they settled with doesn't reflect that at all. You can't see any form of physical damage, both to his armor nor to his physical body, and I think that is one of the biggest issues I have with Errol's design. The core characteristics of Errol and what made his character has been overridden to make him visually appealing, which I think is an issue that a lot of MOBAs have, not just Arena of Valor, but a lot of other MOBAs constantly have, and honestly in games in general, you can see this issue. Second issue I have is aesthetic tension within Errol's costuming designs. This is the second biggest issue I have with Errol, on the basis that his costuming doesn't reflect anything. Nothing about Errol's costume reflects his past, reflects his character. His character was originally a demon hunter, and none of the aesthetics about his costuming reflects that. Because when you take a look at his costuming, you see a lot of these metal edgings. You see this very almost indulgent design to his armor, his one-piece, very skin-tight one-piece armor, I might add. Let's go back to the splash art. If you look at his armor, you can see these serrations and gaps in his armor here that I'm pointing out. These serrations don't do anything functionally for Errol. It doesn't give him better protection. In fact, it gives an enemy an area where they can slot their blade or weapon through to hurt Errol. And I think this is a huge issue, as this shows us that Tencent didn't think about the character's costuming aesthetic and design when they created him, and instead opted to make him look badass, which is okay. I mean, making a character look badass is fine, but you have to have that badass reflect the character's aesthetic and where that character came up and grew up from, right? Errol, as a character, he was a demon hunter. He was a boy, a child, though meek and timid, as it says in his lore, is a boy who grew up on war and battle and killing demons. He isn't going to have armor that has serrations like this, where it allows, number one, enemies to potentially slot a blade through and hurt him. Number two, a character like Errol, in the current state of where his lore is, a character like Errol, who is concerned about, number one, fleeing from demon hunters who is out for his head, and number two, who has internal trauma and conflict with the demon who is slowly consuming his sanity, isn't going to be concerned with making himself look aesthetically appealing with these cool serrations that allows the light from his demon body to glow through like this to create this cool effect, right? Errol wouldn't care about that crap. He wouldn't have armor that looks like this. Instead, I think the original design and concept for Errol is much more well executed, as for example, the one on the far left here, his costume reflects the aesthetic of what a demon hunter looks like. Since if you look at a demon hunter, for example, like Richter, his costuming looks eerily similar to what Errol has right here. And I think this is a much better executed character design, as it is much more utilitarian, it's not showy, it's very basic, but still maintains some sort of protection function from this shoulder pauldron and armor pieces scattered throughout. It looks interesting, it's unique, and it reflects what a demon hunter is supposed to be. The one in the middle here is another interesting take of what Errol could have been. This one has more of a fallen aesthetic to it, with these very sharp form languages, which reflects the idea of what most fallen champions have. And I think this is a well executed character design too. I think this form of very sharp and very edge look to armor for a fallen aesthetic also works. This can be an execution of Errol where it displays a more corrupted version of him, and I think that could have worked well too. And another issue is the lack of physical trauma. On this version of Errol, no physical trauma anywhere. On his armor, literally the minor scufflings here, and that's it. If we look at these three designs, you can see all sorts of torn pieces, these holes in the fabric, and you can see all sorts of physical trauma, and I think that reflects it so well. Another thing that the original concept that executed way better than the current concept and the current thing that we have right now is this idea that the concept artist came up with. This is a great piece of visual storytelling, as a sword embedded in his shoulder shows us some sort of physical trauma that Errol has sustained from perhaps his battle with the demon hunters before he was thrown off the cliff. I think these small details of visual storytelling really does work so well. I really think it's such a shame that Tencent has scrapped this idea, scrapped this more demonic and almost, I wouldn't say gross, but uneasy looking conception of Errol. This more uneasy and this almost uncanny valley feel that they made with Errol's arm, making it almost grotesque in a sense. I think they chose to scrap all these ideas to make Errol visually appealing, and I think that's an issue that many games has, and Errol, to me, long story short, is a well-executed character design that has nothing wrong with it, yet misses out on a lot of opportunities. So Errol is a B tier to me.